So welcome everyone to this webcast today. I'm Pat Soldano, President of Family Enterprise USA and Policy and Taxation Group. We advocate for family-owned businesses and successful families at a national level in Washington, D.C., all sizes of business and all industries. So we appreciate you joining us for this webcast today. Today's topic is how parallel governance can guide generational transition. Parallel governance, or the establishment of a separate governance structure for the family and the business, enables clear communication and direction flowing between the two and joint responsibility for long-term success. During this webcast, you will learn how parallel governance systems for the family and for the business can pave the way for generational transition while delivering operational continuity and sound business performance. So we're very pleased to have with us today two people from EY. First, we have Jim Wood. He's Managing Director, Family Enterprise Business Services, EY Private. As a Managing Director in Ernst & Young's LLP Family Business Services practice, Jim focuses on effective governance, strategic planning, performance management, organizational alignment, and revenue acceleration. He's a leading practitioner in the areas of business governance related to the growth and development of multi-generational family enterprises. In addition, we have Cooper Retfro. He is a manager at Ernst & Young's LLP Family Enterprise Business Services practice, providing advisory support to family-held businesses. He focuses primarily on business growth and generational transition, utilizing corporate development tools and metrics to drive strategic growth planning and the development, launch, and oversight of both generational transition strategies and government systems frameworks. So we're very pleased to have both of you with us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Jim to start the webcast.
Thank you, Pat, very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to be speaking to all of you today. This is a really interesting topic. And as Pat mentioned, Cooper and I have quite a bit of experience and stories to tell and interesting clients and families that we've worked with on this particular topic. If your goal as a family enterprise is to maintain long-term family ownership, then planning for generational transition is critically important to make that goal into reality 20 years from now or 30 years from now, even when you think about long-term. One of the most important aspects of generational transition planning is to consider a parallel governance system. And Pat described it briefly. We're going to dig into it much more today and really focus on how you can use a parallel governance process, why it's important, and how you can set it up to act as, to perform as guardrails to increase the likelihood of long-term success in your family business. So EY is really doubled down on private and family enterprise. A lot of people think of EY as big public accounting, but I'm here to say we're not your father's accounting firm. EY has a huge focus on private companies with specialty practices focused specifically on multi-generational family enterprise. And we've built these practices really to serve owners of family enterprises like you in a variety of areas like tax, wealth transfer, family office, and family business advisory. So what we'll be talking about today with parallel governance resides in our family business advisory practice. So we like to think of family using a metaphor of DNA. And we understand that family and the business are intertwined, just like your DNA. And this is the core at the center of the family enterprise is this interlinking between a family and the operating asset itself. And surrounding that, we think of 4 core strategies that we believe are required for long-term success in any family enterprise. And those are business growth. So you have to be able to grow the business to keep it healthy, keep it profitable. Second one is company capitalization. You've got to be able to fund the business while maintaining control. So understanding the best capital strategies are important. And then you have to have a generational transition strategy. We're going to be talking a little bit about that today. How to provide good governance oversight, both for the business and for the family. And then the fourth is shareholder liquidity. You need to balance the capital needs of the business while providing fair returns to shareholders. So when you think about beyond that, if you're thinking like a CEO, like how am I going to execute on these four strategies? There are 8 strategic priorities with corresponding tactical areas around that to support each of these priorities, all of which need to be executed to be successful in a family enterprise. So when we think of family enterprise, we think very holistically about the entirety of the operation, both for the family and for the operation. But today, as I said before, we're going to specifically zone in on governance and risk as it relates to generational transition. So as a family, as a business grows and as a family grows with it, it usually brings a greater deal of complexity within the family ecosystem. So if you look on the right, you're looking at the operation, the business asset, it's going to require, as it grows from 100 million to 300 to 500 to a billion, you're going to need more sophisticated management structures, especially when it comes to good business governance oversight, to have a good business board. Likewise, on the family side, on the left, the complexity as family members increase, you have more branches, you have more generations, the potential number of roles expand with this increased number of family members. And that can range from passive family members to active on board of the family or managing in the business. So this creates another layer of complexity within the family ecosystem. So if these are not proactively managed with structures and boundaries, this complexity can create issues, can create confusions. So that kind of sets the stage for why we believe governance is an important aspect of a growing family enterprise. We track data at EY on 24,000 family-owned companies ranging in size from 25 million in revenue up to 3 billion in revenue. So on the slide in the left, we call this the middle market slide. If you look at how successful those companies are in moving from generation 1 to generation 2 to 3, et cetera, you can see on the left that most companies do not successfully transition from first generation to second. And, it gets even more challenging beyond that. And this is, I think a lot of us are very familiar with the anecdote of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves, which kind of states the obvious that it's very challenging for a family enterprise to transition from one generation to the next. But what we've also discovered with our data, if you look on the right, if you up the lower threshold range of these businesses to a lower range of 100 million, right? So 100 million in revenue up to 3 billion in revenue, there's a much higher likelihood of transitioning from G1 to G2 to G3. We find that interesting, and I think just to point out that size matters when you're talking about generational transition. And we would attribute that primarily to larger companies tend to have more resources, more advisors available. There's more at stake, so I think there's more attention given to that transition process. If we look at the next slide, we also, it's kind of backdrop for this whole discussion. Our data also shows that there's a huge transition wave coming of family businesses who will be facing some form of succession over the next 10 to 20 years. So if you take that same data set of 24,000 companies between 25 million and 3 billion, if you look at this slide, 62% of CEOs are over the age of 62. So that means in the next 10 to 20 years, there's going to be a huge number of family businesses that are going to be faced with this situation of transferring assets or leadership to the next generation. Yet what we've also found through our research is that most of these CEOs are not prepared for succession, which is interesting because there's usually a high degree of intention to plan to transition to the next generation, but the actual success rate of that is not quite so much. So in our view, this presents an interesting opportunity for acquisitions for those families that are prepared, that have their good governance in place. They are prepared and ready to acquire those companies that are not prepared for succession and who end up being sold either to private equity or to family business acquirers. So the punchline here is that if you have good governance, you can be a net acquirer of these companies. If you're not prepared, you may likely be the one being acquired by a more successful or more ready family.
So Jim, let me interrupt you for a second. I should have told everyone that if you have questions, you can certainly put it in the Q&A or the chat. We did get questions from people when they registered, and we've been through those, and we're going to answer most of those questions really in this presentation. But I have a direct question to you, Jim, and it really is, if succession is such an obvious deterrent to generational transition, why do we see more family enterprise CEOs proactively embracing it?
Yeah, it's a little paradoxical. I would say one of the biggest reasons is just there's a psychology around, especially entrepreneurs, owner founders have a very strong emotional attachment or identity to the business. So you get this I'm not making fun of it because I can see how real this is, but it's like an immortality complex. You don't want to think about your own potential demise, so you tend not to want to deal with it. In addition to that, I've seen also a lot of cases where even if we have a CEO who wants to start planning, it's complex. There's a lot of details in planning, not just from what we're going to be talking about today with governance, and there's usually estate planning involved, and if you have multiple children, like how to be fair and how to make sure everybody's happy, and as we move from picking who's going to lead the business and who's not, et cetera. So there's a lot of dynamics that I think it just like we get overwhelming, and it's easier just to not think about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point.
So I guess that's a good transition to our next section here is that generational transition is fraught with risks. So there's a lot of risk, and our point of view is we know what the risks are, and Pat, to your question, if you know what the risks are in advance, just like in business, like you understand what the risks are, allows you to mitigate, to plan and work through those risks to be increase the probability. Same thing with generational transition. So Cooper's going to run through some of the most common disruptors associated with generational transition, and we'll then talk about how ways to manage and mitigate through those.
Great. Thanks, Jim. So as Jim was saying, transition is complicated. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of potential disruptors. But what we've found over the years is that there's really 6 principal causes of unsuccessful generational transition. So we're going to talk through these one by one here. The first cause is an increasing number of inactive owners and beneficiaries. So looking at the picture here, this is a lot like trying to push 2 similar sides of a magnet together. There's resistance there. In the same way, there's often resistance between active owners and inactive owners. Active owners, on the one hand, they have perks from the operating business. So they get a paycheck, they might get a car, they might get a gas card. Inactive owners, on the other hand, are entirely reliant on financial distributions out of the business as their incentive. So as the family grows with each generation, the percentage of active owners tends to go down. And as that happens, the risk of tension increases. The next cause is uncoordinated demands on business profits. So as the business grows, there's more profits that it's returning, and the risk of conflict grows. So on the business side, the business wants to grow. They want to do CapEx and R&D and make investments into the continued growth of the business. On the other side, the family has its own liquidity needs. So the older generation might be reliant on distributions to contribute to their retirement. There may be estate planning costs at play that they have expectations that the business would cover. And there may be other lifestyle expenses that the younger generation is looking to receive some sort of liquidity to fund. When these things aren't thought of or planned for adequately, it creates a risk, and oftentimes the capital needs outside of the business are not thought through. The third cause is unclear boundaries. So Jim mentioned this earlier, but there's really 5 overlapping roles that an individual might have within a family enterprise. So they may be a family member, they may be part of the ownership base, they may be involved in governance on the family side or the business side, or they may be in management. What we see a lot of times with our clients is you've got somebody saying, hey, I'm an owner of this business. I have voting control by this trust. Maybe I have a trustee. We have an outside CEO, and then I have kids that are beneficiaries. How do we understand what hat people are wearing and where does decision-making authority lie? So to the extent that there's not clear guardrails around the different roles and rights and responsibilities, this has the potential to create confusion with people that wear multiple hats at the same time. The fourth cause is a lack of non-financial capital development. And what we mean by that is traditionally you think of capital as the value that the business creates. For family enterprise, it goes beyond that, and there's 3 additional buckets of what we call non-financial capital that are important to prioritize. If you want good stewards of your family business, you have to place an emphasis on developing these non-financial capital buckets, so human capital, intellectual capital, and social capital. Jim's going to talk more to this in the next section, but it's important that these be addressed with equal weight as the financial capital generated by the business. The fifth cause is inadequate oversight of the business. So what we find is that good oversight stems from good governance, both on the family side as well as on the business side. When we have good governance, that's giving everyone enough insight into what's going on with the operation to where we can continue to perform. Those insights typically come from 3 different areas, so growth and competitive factors, transition and continuity factors, and capital funding factors. And then the final cause that we see is the elephant in the room issues. So there's a handful of both internal and external risks that a lot of times don't get discussed because they're uncomfortable. So you might see a market trend that is not promising for your business and people don't want to talk about it within the boardroom. Jim mentioned the lack of want to talk about succession planning because it's an uncomfortable topic and it's not something that people often want to think about. And then at the same time, there may be intra-family conflicts where there's just built up resentment over the years and it kind of simmers. But when we don't talk about these things, it kind of compounds the risk over the long run.
So I think we have a poll coming up, but I'm going to ask a question of what you just talked about, Cooper. And of these disruptors, what's the top failure for family business generational transitions?
That's a great question. I think what we see is more often than not, there are at least 2 and oftentimes all 6 of these principal causes that are leading to an unsuccessful transition. It's usually not just one item. And as you can see, there's a lot of overlap between each of the 6. So typically one leads into another, which then bleeds into another. So we're usually looking at 4, 5, or 6 of these at play. All right.
Okay, so Jim, I think you're going to share a poll with the group.
Yeah, let's do the first
Correct.
poll. And interesting as, Pat's question, this kind of shows like there's not one clear risk that you're kind of reflecting. That's usually some blend. So it seems like we've got a lot of different answers here, which is very, very typical. And then it's funny, the highest answer came to the elephant in the room, which
Mhm.
sometimes that's, it's like the things that no one's talking about or the unaddressed risks are the ones that seem to be looming large in the back of everybody's mind. Great. Well, thank you.
Yeah, Jim, I find that fascinating because, and then not a surprise, right? It always comes down to communication. And that's the
Mhm.
elephant in the room and these unaddressed risks.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into the next section where we talk about parallel governance. So much of that, the benefit of parallel governance, revolves around establishing expectations for communication, and in a more proactive way. So parallel governance is probably one of the most important things for successful multi-generational family enterprises, to maintain that long-term, over time. So what the three primary benefits, and we like to look at it as an antidote. Like Cooper just went through these six disruptors. We would always say parallel governance is the antidote to that. It drives family cohesion around the common sense of vision and values. It increases accountability and transparency for the business performance and business reporting. And it ensures that the family and the business are setting and following clear policies, clear rules of engagement, which create common expectations among shareholders. And that these are really critical elements when you have that increase in complexity. We've found that successful multi-generational family enterprises um, have established this idea of a parallel governance system, meaning there's a separate governance system or process for the owners and the ownership, and a separate governance process for the business. And in addition to that, there's also a long-term view in thinking about, like, when the design or kind of thinking about the processes for these parallel governance systems, it's not just to address like what's going on today, but many families, as I'm sure many of you on this call, are thinking about not just tomorrow, but like the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years. We have one client that talks about, they want to be 1,000-year family enterprise. Wow, that's a long time. We're encouraging people to think about like the next generation out, like, so 30 years. How can you design systems that are going to provide stability through not just what's going on in your environment today, but into the next generation? How are you setting precedents now that your next generation will benefit from? And I think that's kind of the essence of why generational transition planning is so important. So as an example, we're working with a G1 to G2 family where all the G2s are fairly young. They're like in their 30s and 40s, and they all have little kids. But as they're setting up their parallel governance system, on the one hand, they could say, well, it's simple. It's just us siblings, us five siblings. But what they're recognizing, that everything they do, they want to set a precedent so that they can think ahead of what their kids 10, 20 years from now will be able to inherit in terms of boundaries, expectations, rules of engagement, how things operate within the family and in the business as inheritors and good stewards of this enterprise. So the purpose overall of a parallel governance system is this idea of separating family issues or family matters from business matters so that they're kind of dealt with separately, but still coordinated in some ways. So on the left, owner governance really focuses on creating stewardship capacity And that creates conditions for what we call patient capital. And on the right-hand side, we see the business governance. So business side needs to create a viable growth strategy that's going to generate profits. And this is what we call creating operational confidence among the owners. So ideally, right, the ideal world is you've got this fully functional parallel governance system, and together these two systems create this equilibrium so that they're mutually reinforcing each other over the long term and create the stability and sustainability of the family enterprise. And so, talking a little bit more about patient capital on the left. So, for owners and owners governance, the whole point is to create this idea of patient capital. Patient capital is formed by educating the family. For example, formalizing collective policies, like what's our family employment policy? Education, rules for engagement on good stewardship. What's our collective vision and values among ourselves as family members? What do we stand for? And then on the right, operational confidence comes from knowing, from the shareholders, knowing that there's strong business oversight in place. There's talented executive leadership who are accountable to ensure ongoing business performance. So examples of operational competence could be number one, just a compelling business strategy that is understood that will generate continued growth. Having a capable board, oftentimes we encourage independent board members in a family enterprise that is skilled and capable and objective and really independent in being able to promote a business performance, bring good thought leadership, good ideas, accountability. And then the last thing would be transparency around reporting so that there's a really good understanding of data, not just lagging data, but also leading indicators of data that the board has access to all of that. And so this kind of equilibrium is this parallel governance system can create a really strong functional system for the family enterprise. And Cooper mentioned this as one of the big disruptors, but one of the most important jobs on the owner's governance side is to create this non-financial capital development, to figure out how are we going to invest as a family in the next generation to create this stewardship capacity. How are we preparing the next generation to be good stewards of this family enterprise? And you know what? Just like anything else in life, good intentions without a plan and execution, doesn't necessarily turn out to anything of substance. This takes a lot of focused intention. And, I would say that's one of the most important things that an owner governance or a family council can focus on is how are we intentionally investing in the next generation? Because when you get to that level of complexity in a multi-generational family, not every next gen family member is going to be working in the business. And we see a lot of cases where none of them are working in the business or very few. So how do you get them to understand and participate, engage? And we kind of break it down into these different aspects: human capital, ensuring that each of them are reaching their highest potential with their career, with their passions and aspirations. Then there's intellectual capital. And this is the ability for the family together to learn and grow and to make good decisions. And oftentimes we see a very structured education plan. And that can address things like learning about the business and learning about managing wealth, resolving conflicts, how family makes decisions together. What are their responsibilities as beneficiaries or inheritors or owners? The third is social capital. How are family members contributing back to the greater society? And then culture and values is we believe it's important to articulate what your family's values are, and so that there's a common understanding of what's important and that gets reinforced.
Jim, I want to interrupt for a second because I think it's an appropriate time to ask a question of you that I think was submitted by someone that registered. But I also want to remind everyone, please, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A in the chat and we will attempt to monitor those. But you're talking about the next generation, engaging the next generation, which I think is so important. And so the question was, is there literature you can recommend that is a guide to integrating the younger generation into the meetings, including what topics to cover at what ages?
So I wish there was a quick answer and I could just say, here's the book. I think it's like parenting. There's every parent when the new baby wishes they had the handbook. And I am not aware, Cooper and I talked about this, we're not aware of any specific literature on this topic that we could recommend. What I will say, it is a very big topic. It's a very big trending topic in family enterprise around this idea of how to educate. And secondly, I'll say there's a number of advisors and consultants like us who work with families that have templates that have, we're accumulating leading practices, we're accumulating data around this to develop education programs for the next gens. So far, what we see, it's a lot of, kind of making it up as we go, and we're really bringing what we would consider leading practices to frame up how to approach next gen education. It is a challenge, and I think it's definitely an emerging field right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So when we think about leading practices, and this is kind of the final fully formed diagram of a parallel governance system. You've got the separate governing systems, one for the family, which is oftentimes you see a family council becoming the governance body for the family, and then a board of directors on the business side. But we also have a number of activities we would identify under each family on the owner side and on the business side to support the corresponding development of each side. So on the family side, how are we building patient capital? What is the activities that a family council should be working on to build patient capital? And there are things like, family owner cohesiveness. How are we bringing the family together? Common sense of vision and values. Owner mentoring. How are we educating and training the next generation? And there's a number of other things. There's trusts and estates and making sure everybody understands the business and their boundaries among the different roles. And same thing on the business side. What does a good board look like? And there's a lot of great tools and research around leading practices in a business board. How are they creating value? And do they have the ability to really track performance with transparency around data? And are they, one of the most important jobs of a board is to manage risk, as well as to prepare for succession. Those are really key important roles. So this is what a leading practice looks like. And the one thing, my takeaway from this is not to like study each of these little circles under the different boxes there, but my takeaway from this is that it takes, I would say it takes decades to build up a fully functional parallel governance system. But what we would encourage everybody is to get started. Because if you get started on it, you start building a positive upward cycle, because one success that leads to another. And what we see is the families who get started on this, they just build engagement, and they want to keep learning, and they keep finding new things that they want to add and build into it. So it becomes a very dynamic process. And when you think about it, your family and your business is dynamic as it's growing and evolving over the years. So things change, things grow, there's shifts, there's trends. So having a system in place that can absorb these changes and react to it, so that you're not constantly, scrambling when an issue comes up that like, oh, we hadn't thought about that before. You have structures in place to deal with both positive and challenging issues as they emerge.
You brought up a really important point, and that is just get started, because I hear families talk more about governance, both for their business and for their family, than anything else. And I really echo that advice. Get started, but understand it is a process, and it does take years. As you said, as the family grows, as the business grows, things change in the world with the family and the business. It's just so important to realize that it's not a 1 year job. It's not a project. It's an ongoing effort, and you have to keep it up. So, but you've been talking about the kind of the manager side versus the owner side. So I'd like to ask you a question around that. How can we generate as much priority for the owner side of things as the management side? So that, the tail wagging the dog is not where we want to be for sustainability of the vision that the owner had established.
Yeah, so I think with that, it really does come back to get started, put a plan in place, start small, and just communicate well. So placing an emphasis on the family side, I think comes from the family drives the vision that says 50 years from now, this is where we want to be. And if we can accomplish that, we'll have something that we're really proud of. Getting people to buy into that really just starts with communicating it and setting the expectations that you want that feedback from the family. And then from there, the management team's job is to execute and deliver progress against that vision. So I think it's explaining what impact they can have, and then people start to get excited about it because it's interesting and you feel more attached to the business now that you're steering some of the strategic direction.
Thanks, Cooper. In the interest of time, I'm going to walk pretty quickly through these next few slides so that we do leave a few minutes for Q&A. We're going to start talking more specifically about roles and responsibilities and boundaries, because our next point would be like, okay, here's this wonderful parallel governance system. We'd like to get started, and you cannot have good governance and walk into a structure of any type of governance system without establishing clear boundaries within the family ecosystem. Family members need to understand, what their respective roles are and their corresponding rights and authorities in order to have an effective and functional governance process. So many people are familiar with this three-circle model. This has been around for decades, and it's been really useful to start saying, okay, what hat am I wearing? And it's a Venn diagram, right? So there's overlapping roles, there's blurred lines. The point here being, each circle, whether you're in the family circle, ownership, or management, has a very specific set of expectations, a very specific set of how you treat people. For example, on the family side, hopefully it's unconditional love is the basis for relating to people, while on the management side, it's not unconditional love, it's performance, it's competency, right? So these are different ways of viewing things. So by separating those out and understanding what hat you're wearing, allows families to start getting better at understanding these boundaries. But we've found some challenges with that three-circle model. And an example of this is when you start thinking about over the last couple decades, there's been a lot more emphasis with families on using estate planning vehicles to create tax efficiencies. And that process creates a number of layers of additional complexities. So here's an example that just says, like, number one, you've got an executor for your will. What role does the executor play in all of this? And then we've got trusts. A lot of families we see have multiple trusts, sometimes dozens of trusts set up. And all the trusts have beneficiaries. And the beneficiaries within the trusts rely on trustees. The trustees are the controlling parties of those trusts, but the beneficiaries are economic. They have economic rights, right? They don't necessarily have control rights. So, and sometimes the family, with the estate planning, will allocate funds for philanthropic foundation, and that can have its own set of a board of directors, right? So it starts getting more and more complicated. So when we apply these to the three-circle model, we advance to the next slide, you start, it's like musical chairs, and you start seeing some of these roles don't fit in these three circles. So we've actually, yep, you can keep going, Cooper. These, we've expanded this, as you've seen before, what we call a peacock model. It's actually 5 circles, not 3. Because you've got family, which is obviously, which is probably where the beneficiaries would reside. Then you've got the owners group, which are controlling owners. And then you've got owners governance. So we talked about parallel governance. If you have a family council and you've got family members involved in some role within the family governance, and then you look to the right, there's business governance. That's obviously business board. That's, if you've got outside board of directors, like where do they fit into the three circles? They don't. So they would fit in this business governance. And then you've got management. And so these kind of number one, they kind of demonstrate the complexity in large multi-generational family businesses. Number two, they emphasize the importance of creating boundaries, creating a real clear sense of roles, rights, and responsibilities among each of these. So we're going to do another poll, but before we do it, I just want to close out by just making a couple comments here, and Pat, if there's any other questions maybe you have from the audience, we can ask those. But I think our point here with this webcast today is that parallel governance is really foundational. It's a leading practice. It's a way to ensure your family business can prepare for multiple generations to come. It's a way to avoid disruptors and avoid these risks and to manage them more effectively. And ultimately, it's a long-term process. So you can't see this as a transactional thing like, oh, we're going to get this started. We're going to hire, advisors to get us up and running and we're good. It takes years. It takes years to develop and build the muscle memory. But usually that's a positive experience over time within the family. So we encourage you as owners listening on this call to just start, one thing at a time. Start to work on it one step and with keeping in mind of building a long-term legacy.
So Jim, before we do the next poll, there is a question in the chat, and this is, I think, a really important question and gets asked a lot. This is a question from a Gen 3, and the question really is, how do you get buy-in from the Gen 3s or all the generations for that matter?
I think what we see is typically when there's a lack of buy-in, it's because there's a lack of knowledge of what the enterprise does, how it creates value for the company, for the community, et cetera. So what we see is if we can just get a group to take the first step, it kind of snowballs from there because they see the impact that they're able to have. And it's kind of like, hey, that was pretty cool. And I learned a lot and I got to work with my cousins on something and I see the impact of it. What's next? What else can I do? How else can I help? I think is what we see with our clients.
I'll give an example too, Pat, of a situation where it was a G4 family. So they had G3s who were, in their late 60s, 70s, kind of transitioning out of the business. And then you had G4s, of which only one worked in the business. And then you had, 9 or 10 people that were not active in the business, but they were, inheritors, owners, and beneficiaries. And what this group did, you talk about buy-in, the G4s just got together on their own and they started meeting every month. And they had a call every month and they started doing this and talking about what their interests are, what their concerns, and the family member who was a leader in the business, was able to talk to them about what's going on in the business, what types of things, answer questions they may have. They did this spontaneously on their own, and they liked it so much they set it up every month religiously, and they did this for like a year and a half, and it really got the attention of the G3s. Their parents who said, "Oh, there's something going on here. Let's get more formal and let's get engaged." So, and they are now embarking with the G3s fully supported behind this parallel governance process.
Well, I think that's a really important point. And to that point, there was a question in the registration that is somewhat along these lines that I'm going to ask you to answer, and that is, how do you charter the family council to empower its role beyond that of the family party planner, which we see, which intrinsically, on the fiduciary side to the shareholders and of the independent board. So we see this all the time. Is the get together by the family, is it a social event or is it a business event? Or is it both? And if so, what does that look like? Is the business talked about? Is the estate plan talked about? Maybe I know this is a big, long subject, but maybe you could kind of give us a sense of the charter of the family council.
Well, I think the key word is charter, right? Because if you have a family charter or a family constitution, that should outline what are the key activities and philosophies of the family council. Now, family councils are not like legally binding. They're more of a covenant among the family that kind of focuses everybody around like this is an investment, this is important, this is what's important to us. And so the family charter usually outlines what's important to us and what are we going to focus on. Sometimes you need to like poll family members. What do they want to talk about? What are their concerns? If there's apathy, right? If you've got an apathetic group, well, that's important. How are we going to, like Cooper was saying before, create engagement? Sometimes step one is a social event. Like let's bring everybody together. Let's have a family retreat. Let's go off site. I think there's so many ways to approach it, but ultimately the family council, if it's really actively up and running and doing a good job, there's so much to do because there's so much to do around just educating and making sure family members understand what it is to be participating in a family enterprise, to be understanding the not just the legacy, but the future vision for what it means to be part of this. Philanthropy is a big part to get involved with. We see a lot of families where there's uncoordinated estate planning, uncoordinated, like we have one family that, many of the members didn't even have wills. So they were like, our family council needs to be the shepherd to coordinate and encourage people because you need an attorney. Like here's an attorney to talk to. That can't be an excuse. So it really gets into how are you protecting the legacy, the stewardship, and the wealth of the family by making sure everybody is acting as good stewards. So I think the more activities and involvement and initiative the family counselor, the family governance can take, the more it starts showing that like we're doing more than just planning, a vacation together. Like we're actually, and we've got a lot of examples if people want to talk to us offline, of so many ways that families are kind of taking those steps. And it's an evolution, right? It's not like a big bang, but it's starting like, what's the first thing? What's the second thing we want to address? What's the third thing? And then sometimes we see these family councils, once they get started, put like a 3-year plan together with priorities. Like, okay, we got our feet wet. We know what the issues are, or what the concerns, or what the priorities are going to be, and you start sharing that with the broader family, and they're like, oh, there's some really interesting things this group is doing, and they're important things. Because if they don't do it, it's kind of left to the wind as far as creating this intentionality that I talked about before.
Well, and if they don't do it, they actually they put the family and the business at risk. They can
That
potentially
risk.
do that, right? By not
Exactly.
having those trusts, by not having those wills, even the reputation of the business, the reputation of the family's at risk. That's where I think the family council can add so much value. And so to that, I think this is the question for Cooper. Let's talk about AI. I mean, talk about risk to families. How are families dealing with AI? Both, the older generation and the younger generation. What are you seeing?
So I think this has obviously become a very popular topic and question over the past 18 to 24 months. So the easiest example I can think of is we have a lot of clients that are working on development of policies in some form or fashion. So it may be a family charter, family constitution, it may be a set of bylaws for the family council, or it may be policy statements that address a handful of different topics. And while we do have some clients that are blessed enough to have writers in the family, we have others that say, hey, we're business people and engineers, we're not writers. How do we start this? So what we've seen is using ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever platform you elect to use, to come up with a list of ideas to create an outline for a policy statement that says, what do we want this to address? Or to the extent that you're getting into it and you get to a section, you're stumped, you don't know where to start, using that to kind of give you some draft language, then take back to the family and workshop from there. So they're still making it their own, but it's a good way to kind of get the best thinking out there to get the wheels moving with your family.
So we do have a question in the chat. I think this is a big question. Either of you can answer it, which is, can you send participants a list of the endless things a family council does or what a family representative does? That's a big list.
Yeah, and we have big lists at EY that can answer that. So when I showed the Cooper, maybe you can back up to the six-pack slide. When we had the kind of the fully functional parallel governance system. So if you look on the left, those six circles, each of those have a variety, they're categories. They're categories that have a list of activities under each of those. So I think we could, as a follow-up, provide some examples of what those activities look like, because you start recognizing how substantial, and it's not to overwhelm people, but it's to like get to usually when we're working with families, we zone in on like which of those six are the highest priority. What's going to make the biggest bang for the buck if you focus and invest time, and then let's look at what kinds of activities would be conducted under that particular category. So I'm not going to give the activities now, but we can do a follow-up with some more details around that.
Okay, and as Lauren just put in the chat, the slides are available. There's a link in the chat as well as they will be sent out with the recording of this webcast. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I do have a couple more questions from people that registered. I think we're going to run out of time here. So in the interest of time, I will ask one question, which is what trend, and this is probably a big question too, what trends do you see happening in family governance today? And you talked about some of these in your presentation.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because we see things that like sometimes we look at and say, oh, that's really progressive. So I don't know if it'd be a trend, but we're starting to see the one thing I mentioned that I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but family education, like that is a big, big topic, and figuring out how to structure something that is age appropriate for the various members of the family. So that's a big topic, and that's a big trend right now. Another trend we're seeing is families putting on the business governance side, creating a role called board observers for family members, like an official role for family members to be able to sit and observe board meetings, and also prepares them, right? It exposes them, but also prepares them to potentially become board members in the future. So those are a couple examples, as well as I have to say, independent board members, through an advisory board. So big trend with a lot of families, starting from scratch with a board saying, let's start with an advisory board because we can kind of get, some training wheels and get some independent thinking into our governance process.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Also, what I see is the role of chief learning officer. Not so much in single family offices. It's hard to justify that role, but maybe in the multifamily offices, this role of chief learning officer. We do have a final question here in the chat. And this is actually a question to everyone, but what percent of family offices are holding Bitcoin as a tool to preserve and transfer wealth? I can't answer that. I don't know if you guys can either.
I can't answer that. We're not. We have a family office advisory practice that Cooper and I are not part of, but there's probably somebody there who might have an answer to that. We're the family
Yeah.
enterprise business, yeah, the operation side.
Yeah, I get that.
Interesting question.
Okay.
Dang.
Yeah, it is, especially in today's world. Well, I really want to thank both of you for doing this webcast today. I think the information was very, very helpful to our listeners. And again, this is being recorded, so we're going to send it out. We'll send it out, the recording with the slides, so you'll all have those to review at a later time. So Cooper, Jim, thank you so much for being on this webcast today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for attending.
Okay, thank you all for listening. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye now.